Question orale. The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
They say weak men create hard times, and this weak Prime Minister's inflationary deficits gave Canadians the worst standard of living in over 40 years. The finance minister promised one of her fiscal guardrails would not be going over her deficit, which is $40 billion. In fact, the PBO said she blew right past it. Simple question, what's the deficit?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable colleague.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what my honourable colleague fails to point out is that Canada is projected to have the fastest growing economy in the G7 next year. He fails to point out that we are creating jobs at a near record pace. He doesn't understand that wages are increasing faster than inflation. His strategy for the economy is to make cuts to the programs that are supporting people, cuts to the programs that are building houses. He's opposing, ironically, the tax cut that would deliver relief to families over the holidays. We're going to focus on growing the economy in a way that works for everyone, not the Conservative approach to cut the supports that families need.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
He could have just said he doesn't know, like he doesn't know where the million people he lost went. And even this number-challenged Prime Minister admits every new dollar of his handouts make his inflationary deficits worse. He says he's going to leave the economy to the bankers, that he doesn't think about monetary policy, and he said budgets balance themselves. It's the same incompetence that made Canadians bank broke, building broke, and belly broke. Canadians want to know how broken the Liberal deficit is. What's the number?
Way to go, Jack!
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
My honourable colleague seems to have a penchant for alliteration and personal insults, but what he lacks is an ability to advance policies that will grow the economy or actually help people in need. Mr. Speaker, at every opportunity, they oppose the investments that are creating jobs in this country. They oppose the investments that are building homes in this country, and they oppose the measures that are going to provide tax cuts to middle-class families, to low-income families, to workers in this country. For once, I wish we could have a debate about the issues instead of stooping to these lows where they throw insults instead of advancing policies that help real people.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Here's a common sense policy that common sense Conservatives will bring in when his constituents fire him after the next election. We're going to axe the tax for good for everyone. And these deficits that this Prime Minister keeps making sent over 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month, made 1 in 4 Canadians skip meals, and sent 1 in 5 kids into poverty. But the Finance Minister said all of them are just feeling a vibe session. Look, if she's not going to release her economic statement, will she at least tell Canadians how bad she's going to blow through her deficit?
Yeah, way to go, Jack!
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
I'd like to remind that member that the last time the Conservatives were in government, more than 16% of kids were living in poverty, over 1 million children. Since we've come into government, Mr. Speaker, we've lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty through measures like the Canada Child Benefit, supporting families each and every month with up to over $700, through the National School Food Program, now in place in 4 provinces across this country, helping to ensure kids have food at school. Not to mention an HST, GST tax break, Mr. Speaker. We're there for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of this Prime Minister supported by the Bloc Québécois, this Liberal government is so bad that it's ashamed of its own results. In the last budget, the Minister of Finance predicted a $40 billion deficit, but now we know that the government has added at least $6 billion in inflationary spending to that forecast. But the Prime Minister is ashamed to reveal what the state of the public coffers is. When will the Prime Minister accept our offer to be transparent with Canadians and present the fall economic statement on Monday? Why are they so afraid of letting Canadians know the truth? Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Well, speaking of telling Canadians the truth, Mr. Speaker, when we offered a tax break to Canadians over the holidays, a proposal that a leader of the Conservative Party supported a mere 2 years ago, then what did the leader of the official opposition do? He told his MPs to vote against it, regardless of what they actually wanted. Here in Ottawa today, Conservative members are no longer the representatives of their constituents here in Ottawa. On the contrary, they carry the will of their leader back into their ridings. It's inexcusable. If they really are serious about helping Canadians, they will vote for the tax break. I would invite the honourable member for Port-Neuf, Jacques Cartier, to not take the floor, if not allowed by this chair. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, this member ought to be ashamed. The Prime Minister, with the support of the Bloc, keeps spending unaccountably, or without accountability, rather. Meanwhile, families are paying a price for this. According to a Sylvain Charlebois report on food prices, families will have to pay up to $800 more for the groceries in 2025. The Prime Minister thinks that budgets will balance themselves, but he has also said that deficits lead to inflation. He promised to limit the deficit to $40 billion. So will next week's economic statement confirm that he will keep that commitment, or will he cause even more inflation for families? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, my colleague just quoted Sylvain Charlebois on food prices. That same person has said that climate change is the biggest challenge for the agri-food sector. In fact, he just published a report on the impact, the macroeconomic impacts of all this on the agricultural sector. And on page 14, the first part of the report is on climate change. Did it mention the carbon price? No, not at all. That's not even a factor, according to Professor Charlebois. None of this makes any sense. I would just remind the minister to not use documents like this as props. You can quote things, but you can't visibly reference a document. Honourable member for La Prairie. Well, Mr. Speaker, this will come as a shock to no one, but the Senate is still dragging its feet on Bill C-282 for protecting supply management. For 18 months, our so-called wise men and women in the upper chamber have been looking at this bill, which has a single clause. They've spent 18 months studying a single clause. And yet today they are still postponing a vote on a crucial amendment. They're trying to push it until after the holidays. Will all of the party leaders ask these senators to stop dragging their feet, to have a vote, and to ensure that C-282 is carried before Christmas? The Honourable Government House Leader. As my colleague knows very well, we on this side of the House, we support this bill. The Prime Minister, all of our ministers and caucus have spoken with the senators and are suggesting that they do that work. In fact, the only party leader in this House that we don't know where he stands is the Conservative leader, because we know his caucus is divided on the issue of supply management. But I can assure my honourable colleague that this government fully supports supply management. The honourable member for La Prairie. Things are not moving quickly enough, Mr. Speaker. It's been 18 months. The senators have still not managed to study a bill with a single clause. It can only mean one of two things. Either they're ready to retire or they're thumbing their nose at us once again. And when I say that, I'm not just speaking of the MPs here in this House. I'm also speaking of all of the farmers in Quebec and Canada who are under the supply managed system. That's 90,000 jobs just in Quebec. These people deserve to get an answer before Christmas. On behalf of our farmers, will all the parties ask the senators to get moving before the holidays? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my honourable colleague in the Bloc Québécois, we agree. This is important for farmers. This is important for the supply managed sectors in Quebec and elsewhere in the country. We agree with that bill. We support what the Bloc has done. We support the bill getting through the Senate. Only the Conservatives seem to have issues with this. So I would invite my honourable member for the Bloc Québécois to speak with the Conservative Party to ensure the Conservative senators stop blocking this bill.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. L'honorable député de New Westminster, Burnaby.
Les gens en arrachent avec.
Mr. Speaker, people are struggling with the cost of living throughout the country, and a new report shows that a 4-person family will pay $800 additional for groceries in 2025. Meanwhile, big grocery chain CEOs are raking in the profits, but the Conservatives don't care at all about the working class. They always want to help their billionaire buddies. Meanwhile, the Liberals could change things if they wanted to. Will they finally stand up against the greed of the big grocery chains? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent question. The NDP has an opportunity to help people during the holidays. By helping them have this tax break, we're asking the NDP to work with us to help Canadians so that millions of people will get a tax break over the holidays. They have an opportunity to do that, and I'm asking them to help.
Honourable member from Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Translation, they won't. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are feeling squeezed. A new report says a family of 4 can expect to pay $800 more in food in 2025. While grocery CEOs are getting richer, workers are scrambling to put food on the table. Liberals let people down. And the Conservatives, they want tax breaks for CEOs, leaving Canadians paying more for everything. Billionaires don't need relief. The working class does. Will the Liberals permanently remove the GST off of life essentials so that families can get a break?
Hear, hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
We know that life is expensive, Mr. Speaker, and we want to deliver a break to Canadians. We know that the cost of food has gone too high, which is why we want to remove tax over the holidays. The irony is the Conservatives make the same attack, but they are opposing a tax cut on food for families. Right. Mr. Speaker, I should plan as well the idea that we've got an important stakeholder in Ottawa advocating for a national school food program this week. Her name is Molly. She is an 8-year-old in grade 3 at A.G. Bailey in Nova Scotia, and we're going to provide not only a tax cut on food, but a national school food program so she and her classmates will be able to enjoy a healthy meal every day of the year.
Order. The Honourable Member for Foothills.
The NDP Liberal Carbon Tax Coalition is delivering Canadians a Christmas nightmare. Canada's Food Price Index report showed that on average, Canadians will spend $800 more on groceries this year. The Prime Minister's carbon tax is making a dire situation even worse. The number of food bank visits in Toronto are up 1 million people to 3.5 million visits, a 43% increase in new food bank users. Scurvy is on the rise. Food insecurity has surged more than 20%. All Canadians want for Christmas is a carbon tax election. When will this Prime Minister make that Christmas wish come true?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report that the member opposite...
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary from the top, please.
Let's get serious, Mr. Speaker. The very report that the members opposite cite says that climate change is the greatest driver of food price inflation. It's the same thing Sylvain Charlebois said when he came to committee recently, and the Conservatives have no plan to fight climate change. In addition, we stepped up over the holidays to offer Canadians a GST tax cut. What did the Conservatives do? They opposed. When we step up to help children across Canada get food at school, what do the Conservatives do? They oppose. You want to make Canadians Canadians a Merry Christmas? Step up.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Well, I guess it would take a Festivus miracle to have a serious Prime Minister who understands that when you increase taxes on farmers who grows the food, truckers who move the food, you increase costs of the food. But after 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, this is the Christmas list Canadians face. Grocery prices up $800. Price of food inflation is up 36% higher in Canada than the United States. A quarter of Canadians are skipping meals. When will this Prime Minister grant a common sense Christmas gift to Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Speaker, I'd like to quote Mac Levesque, Chief of Security at TD Bank, and he says, I quote, "Okay, enough. This is an outright lie, and I'm not in the habit of calling people liars. The report he's referring to does not mention that the carbon tax is a factor behind the $800 increase, and certainly does not say that carbon tax will cost families $800 more on food." That's coming from the Chief Security Officer at TD Bank, Mr. Speaker.
Money launderer, thanks. Order. The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Under this Prime Minister, New Brunswickers continue to struggle and will now have to pay $800 more for food next year. After 9 years, the NDP Liberal carbon tax has caused the price of groceries to skyrocket. According to Food Bank Canada, the number of people accessing food banks increased by 73% the last 2 years. Over 1 million Ontarians are relying on food banks. That's more people that live in my home province. Canadians deserve better. Will the Prime Minister agree that now is the time to call a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A reminder that that member and all of the Conservatives have had an opportunity to support the work that we're doing to provide relief to families in New Brunswick and across the country. I look to the National School Food Program, Mr. Speaker. So far, 4 provinces have signed on, meaning over 184,000 kids will receive food at school this school year. More than 1.5 million meals, Mr. Speaker. They could support us with affordability measures should they choose to do what's right, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Miramichi Grand Lake.
Mr. Speaker, not a single plate of food has been served, and 1.4 million Canadian children are living in poverty. The rise in the cost of food is a direct result of the carbon tax. The Prime Minister doesn't understand. If you tax the farmer that grows the food and the trucker that ships it, you end up taxing the family that buys it. Already the NDP Liberal carbon tax has resulted in food prices increasing 36% faster in Canada than across the border. Will the Prime Minister finally give Canadians the carbon tax election now?
Although the chair couldn't quite make out the words, he did hear some people intervening from the far end of the chamber. It is really important, and this was brought up this morning in different meetings, but it's really important for members not to speak while other members are talking, for no other reason than the respect that we could have for our members who use the translation devices so that they can hear what's going on in the House. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just because a Conservative member of Parliament makes something up doesn't mean that it's true. The Minister of the Environment has quoted the actual report that says specifically that the price on pollution is not responsible for the increase in food prices. But if the Conservatives were honest with Canadians and wanted to actually do something to help them with the high cost of food over the holidays, they could support our GST tax break for Canadians that is taking the GST off of essential items, including groceries, Mr. Speaker. If they were honest with Canadians, they would support the school food program that is feeding 184,000 kids. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Once again, the honourable member from Abbotsford, I'm just going to ask him please not to take the floor unless recognized by the House so that everybody can participate.
The honourable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, you know, we have this beautiful tradition in Canada. Children who write letters to Father Christmas. But this year, we've learned that Santa has never received so many letters from kids who are not asking for toys, but instead are asking Santa for food, scarves, winter coats and gloves. That's what children are asking for after 9 years of this Liberal government. A $500 billion deficit from this government. Are they really proud of their record? The Honourable Minister of Seniors and Labour. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am left speechless by what my colleague says when he just voted against the GST break. Coats, mittens, children's clothes, and many other things like prepared foods and restaurants would all benefit from that. And so this member voted against that, and believe it or not, he also is against school food programs. He doesn't want to fund breakfasts and lunches in schools. It's unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member for Louis Saint Laurent. Well, I am against a 10-cent break on a bag of chips. What a huge difference. Well, real talk, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of this government, 2 million Canadians are having to go to food banks. And food prices are going to go up by $800 next year due to this government's inflationary policies. After 9 years of this inflationary government with the support of the Bloc Québécois, is this government really proud of its economic record?
L'honorable ministre du Travail et des Aînés.
The Honorable Minister. Well, we are proud of the low rate of unemployment in Quebec, our record levels of foreign investment. This is a leading country on the world stage, and yet what does the member across the way say when we're offering a tax break on things like toys, Christmas trees, children's clothes, restaurant meals? Well, this member got up and voted against it. He keeps talking about affordability, but he voted against it. It's unbelievable. The honorable member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, things are getting serious for Lion Electrique, and the Prime Minister should keep his promises. In 2021, the Prime Minister personally went to the Lion Electrique factory to announce billions of dollars in the Zero Emission Transit Fund. And the Prime Minister told the company to get ready to be snowed under by orders for buses from the rest of Canada, but that never happened. Why? Because the federal government refused to grant the full sums that it had said it would give in subsidies to potential buyers. So will the Prime Minister finally keep his promise and unblock the funds? The Honorable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for the Bloc Québécois for his question. Lion Electrique is indeed an extremely important business when it comes to transit electrification, not just in Quebec, but elsewhere in Canada as well. And the federal program will enable municipalities to buy hundreds of electric buses. Thanks to that program, Mr. Speaker, unlike what my colleague for the Bloc Québécois and for the Conservative Party, what my colleagues have said. Order, please.
À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. L'honorable député de Rivière-du-Nord.
The honorable member. Well, this is talking about the future, and the future is too late. The Prime Minister didn't just make this promise to Lion Electrique. He also made promises to their workers, including the 400 who just got laid off right before the holidays. But at the time, the company took the Prime Minister at his word, and they opened a second battery factory in Mirabel. They hired people. They bought supplies. But then in the end, they are not getting orders because the federal government has not provided the funds it promised to potential buyers. The Prime Minister has had a role to play in the difficulties facing the company. So he needs to personally take action. Will he?
To the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we know where the puck is going in the world economy, which is towards the clean economy of the future. Our government has been working hard to attract billions of dollars of investment to secure good-paying jobs for generations to come. That's precisely the work we've been doing. We know Lion Electric is a leader in electric buses and electric trucks in this country, and we'll make every effort to work with them to get projects across the finish line. This situation is being monitored closely, and we know how important it is to Quebec and the Government of Canada.
The honourable member for Pierre Boucher des Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, we know that the transit sector is going to have a green pivot. That includes school transit. It's completely inevitable that this is going to happen. But the real question is, when we do buy these electric buses, are we going to be buying Quebec buses built by Quebecers, or will we buy American buses built by Americans? Because Ottawa once again showed a lack of vision and abandoned this flagship company. Will this government finally wake up and unblock all of the money in the Zero Transit Emission Fund?
L'honorable ministre du Logement.
The Honorable Minister of Housing. Mr. Speaker, through the Zero Emission Transit Fund, the federal government will be helping school bus and transit operators to electrify their transit fleet. This is essential. We need to invest to support this pivot in our economy in order to seize opportunities to build the green economy. I have spoken with my counterparts in Quebec in order to identify solutions, and we will continue to make all necessary investments to strengthen the green economy throughout the country, including in Quebec.
The honourable member for Cumberland Colchester.
Speaker, as we approach Christmas, there is no joy. A recent study shows that more than 21% of Nova Scotia households were food insecure in 2022, which is a 17% year-over-year increase. And about 1/5 of those people who are food insecure seek help through services like food banks. As a result, food bank use in Nova Scotia has skyrocketed. Food bank leaders say it's a perfect storm between the rising cost of living, unaffordable housing, and inadequate income. Will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election today so that Nova Scotians can feed themselves with dignity?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Food insecurity is a very serious issue, including in my home province of Nova Scotia. But, Mr. Speaker, it's hard to take seriously the question from the Conservative Party members when they are literally opposing a tax cut on food. This holiday season, we are putting a GST holiday in place to reduce the cost of food that people buy, including when they go out to eat at restaurants, including products that are not exempt at grocery stores. Mr. Speaker, I hope the honourable member will put his money where his mouth is and for once support a measure that is going to deliver meaningful financial relief to families in need.
The honourable member from Cumberland Colchester.
Well, Speaker, I suggest that member opposite go to the grocery store now again, because essentials, grocery essentials, are already GST exempt, and the temporary tax trickery on foods such as sugary and salty foods and coated candy, popcorn, beer, and ready-to-drink alcoholic drinks are certainly not going to help food insecurity on behalf of any Canadians. And we continue to see that accessing food banks has increased 73%, and now more than 1 million Ontarians are visiting food banks, which is 6 times the population of Prince Edward Island. Canadians need relief. Will they have a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
It is absolutely clear my honourable colleague was not listening to the answer to his first question before he delivered his second. I said specifically that we are exempting tax on food that is not already exempted from the GST, including food that people may purchase at a restaurant. Mr. Speaker, what's interesting is the Conservatives are opposed not just to the tax cut on holiday gifts, toys for kids, clothing for kids, diapers, car seats, and food. They oppose the measures we put in place to reduce the cost of living when we cut taxes for the middle class, when we stop sending child care checks to millionaires so we can put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 Canadian families. They just don't care about people. It's all politics.
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Member from Regina Leuven.
Obviously, that minister hasn't been to a grocery store in a while. The NDP Liberals dribbling up the carbon tax will cost Saskatchewan people $2,000 a year. Now, the latest food price report shows Canadians are being forced to buy less nutritious food because of the higher prices. This is Canada under that Prime Minister. To make matters worse, the average family will spend $800 additionally on groceries next year. Will these NDP Liberals finally do the right thing and call a carbon tax election so Canadians can decide between their plan to tax everything and our plan to axe the carbon tax on everything for everyone? Forever!
Order. Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, this feigned sympathy, these crocodile tears on behalf of the Conservatives is fooling no Canadian. When the Conservatives had the opportunity to support measures that would help Canadians, measures like cutting their taxes, Mr. Speaker, they opposed. When we proposed a school food program that's going to help feed thousands of children across the country in their schools, Mr. Speaker, they opposed. Every time we try and help Canadians, Conservatives stand up and oppose that help, Mr. Speaker. Let us be clear. This Conservative leader does not have the interests of Canadians at heart.
The honourable member from Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Parents are struggling to get their children the health care they need. 5 million Canadians don't have a family doctor and are relying on emergency rooms to get care. And ER visits are even higher for kids. A new report shows that 1 in 7 ER visits could have been treated in primary care. Liberals and Conservatives before them cut healthcare transfers, and it's led to this crisis. Why are the Liberals doing so little for Canadians for them to get the care they need?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Speaker. Canadians deserve good public health care across the country. That is why we as a government support publicly funded healthcare system. That is why we're making unprecedented investment in our healthcare system. $290 billion over 10 years across the country to every province and territory, with the sole purpose of ensuring that primary healthcare is available to all Canadians across this country. And we urge our provinces to take action to make sure that there are more doctors and nurses available in all those communities by using the federal dollars that have been transferred to them. Thank you.
The honourable member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, everyone across Canada is feeling the high cost of living, and that's especially true for people living in the remote communities on Haida Gwaii, who are isolated from the mainland by a 7-hour ferry ride. Now there is a tax deduction that is meant to help people in remote communities afford the high cost of living. But 30 years ago, it was a Liberal government that cut Haida Gwaii's access in half. Now, they've been fighting to get it back ever since, and so my question is, will this Liberal government do the right thing and restore the full Northern residents tax deduction for the good people of Haida Gwaii?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question, a very important question. We've been working since day one on affordability issues for all people of the North and isolated communities. We brought in a tax cut for groceries, for diapers, for essential items last week. The Conservatives voted against it. We brought in a national school food program, Mr. Speaker. The Conservatives voted against it. There's more to do, but we'll get it done with partners.
The honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the government announced their intention to split the Online Harms Act into 2 parts, to move quickly, to act now, and to advance child protection measures. We've lost too much time because of the Conservative stalling tactics. I find it unconscionable that the Conservatives are opposed to forcing the removal of child sexual abuse material from the internet. Can the Minister of Justice explain why the updated Bill C-63 is essential for the safety of Canadians, especially our kids?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Auditor Attorney General.
Everything in my power to protect children. That is what splitting this bill is about. At committee this morning, Carol Todd, the mother of Amanda, said, quote, "I've waited 12 years for this because on day 1 of Amanda's death, I knew that things needed to change in terms of law, legislation, and online safety. I can't bring my child back, but we can certainly keep other children safe." Mr. Speaker, parents need our help. Children need our help. Bill C-63 is about protecting kids and saving lives. Every party in this chamber has a vested interest in doing just that. Will everyone find the courage to back this bill?
The honourable member for Kildonan, St.
Mr. Speaker, last week the people of Toronto were shocked to see a man attempt a violent carjacking, shooting up cars all over the 401. And it's not just Toronto. Gun violence is up 116% under this Liberal government. In fact, it's the 9th consecutive year that gun violence has increased in this country. And what are the Liberals doing today, Mr. Speaker? Another announcement, but not targeting the criminals on the 401. No, targeting turkey hunters and sport shooters and trained, tested, and vetted law-abiding Canadians. When are they going to realize that gun violence is only going to stop when they go after the criminals responsible for gun violence?
Order. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's quite shameful on the anniversary of one of the largest mass shootings targeting women in this country. The Conservatives seem to be more concerned about keeping guns on the street that are designed for the battlefield. Mr. Speaker, we are not going after hunters or sport shooters. What we're doing is we're protecting our communities. In particular, we're protecting women who are disproportionately victims of gun violence. While Conservatives work for the gun lobby, we serve Canadians in keeping them safe.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Kildonan St. Paul.
This Liberal government has no credibility when it comes to protecting women. In the 9 years they've been in power, sexual assaults have increased 75%. 94 municipalities and the province of Nova Scotia have declared intimate partner violence as an epidemic. In Canada, Mr. Speaker, one woman in Peel Region is strangled to death every single day, and violent abusers of women are getting let out on bail easier than ever because of the Liberal Bill C-75. There's only one party in this place that's going to protect women from the monsters who abuse them, that's going to put criminals of gun violence behind bars, and that's the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. Win through to get an election.
Order. Order. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, our track record on protecting people from violence, on guns.
Colleagues, I cannot even hear the answer. Please, I'm going to ask you to restrain yourselves while we hear the answer. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General from the top, please.
Mr. Speaker, our track record on protecting women from violence, from violent firearms, speaks for itself with respect to assault rifles, with respect to handguns. What I find actually quite appalling is that party's ability to stand up and talk about what women want in this chamber. Because when today, Barbara Lavers at the Justice Committee said on Bill C-63, we must work together as communities, families, and governments to reduce the online abuse of our children. Social media platforms must be held accountable. They must help keep our children safe. Children like Harry are dying. Her son is dead because of online safety issues that party opposes. That's unconscionable.
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Member from Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, at the Status of Women Committee, we hear from abused woman after abused woman who have been hurt and their lives endangered because of Bill C-75. Their abusers are getting out on bail easier than ever before.
I'm sorry. I'm having some difficulty hearing the Honourable Member. The Honourable Member from Kildonan St. Paul from the top, please.
The statistics on women speak for themselves. 75% increase of sexual assaults. 75% increase since they've been in power. Sexual violations against children up 120%. And why is this? We've heard from Status of Women Committee over and over from abused women. It's Bill C-75. These monsters are getting out on bail and killing women. That's on this Liberal government, no matter what they say. Their announcement today will not protect a single woman in this country, Mr. Speaker. When are they going to call an election so that Conservatives can get in power and do something about it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we're listening to women, we're listening to mothers. The Canadian Centre for Child Protection put out a promotional video about our work to combat online harms. They had the mother of Rehtaeh Parsons, the mother of Amanda Todd, the mother of Harry Burke, whom I just quoted. All three of these women share one thing in common. They desperately want this Parliament to keep Canadian children safe. We have a proposal to do exactly that by taking child pornography and child sex abuse material off of the internet. Surely, for the love of God, 338 people can agree on that priority.
Order. L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we are ending the days of action against violence against women on a very bad note. In May 2020, this government unilaterally banned the use of legally obtained firearms by law-abiding citizens. In November 2022, with the support of the Bloc Québécois, they banned hunting weapons. While they go after honest citizens, gun violence has increased by 116% over the last 9 years. Illegal weapons are flowing freely across the border, and criminals are using them with impunity. Will this government please leave sports shooters and hunters alone and go after criminals?
The
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we have taken concrete action to remove from circulation war weapons which were designed for the battlefield, Mr. Speaker. We are taking action against assault weapons that do not belong in our community, Mr. Speaker. I find that shameful. It's the 35th anniversary of the Polytechnique shooting. Meanwhile, the Conservatives are standing up and repeating the falsehoods by the firearms lobby. The Honourable Member for Drummond. On Tuesday, Quebec's National Assembly made me very proud to be a Quebecer when it unanimously supported a motion denouncing hate speech and calling for an end to the religious exemption. Calling for someone's death in the name of God should not be more lawful or legitimate than calling for someone's death because you don't like them. Freedom of religion is not a license to propagate hatred, Mr. Speaker. If a religion is misogynistic or homophobic, then that's the problem, not women's and homosexuals. Why did the Liberals reject the motion to denounce the religious exemption, even though the motion was similar to the one passed unanimously on that same day by the National Assembly of Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are aware of the fact that hatred is rising in our communities and that there is an increase in anti-Semitism everywhere in Canada at the moment. The Bloc Québécois suggestion is a good one. We want to study it in depth. What I would like to underscore is what I've said many times before, which is that we already have in this place on the table legislation to combat hatred in Canada. That is Bill C-63. If they want to support that legislation, that would help all Canadians. The Honourable Member for Drummond. I barely got through a sentence of the motion yesterday when some members started shouting no. I only had time to say that the House of Commons declare that hate speech is not tolerable, and already the Liberals were saying no. There are people in this House who have no problem tolerating hate. People can say, go God, kill all those miscreants. If we put it in God's hands, it becomes perfectly acceptable to make threats and spread hatred, according to the Liberals. The Liberal Justice Minister says he wants to ban hate speech. Well, how does he feel about Liberal MPs insisting that death threats should be legal as long as they are made in the name of God? The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, hatred is on the rise, and it's up 130% as compared to a few years ago. All Canadians and Quebecers are experiencing this. We do wish to discuss the Bloc Québécois bill. We're very willing to debate it, but we already have C-63, which actually relates to the same criminal code section as the Bloc Québécois motion and bill. For instance, it would increase punishment for hatred and those who incite hatred. So we need to do this work all together.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
It was just reported in Vancouver that 2 people were wounded in another random stabbing. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, these tragic stories are sadly more common as violent crime is up 50%. NDP Liberals' soft on crime policies and laws have unleashed a crime wave across Canada, including random attacks. Bill C-75 created a catch-and-release bail system. Bill C-5 removed mandatory minimum sentences on many serious crimes. Will the Liberal government reverse these reckless policies?
The Honourable Minister for Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-75 codified existing Supreme Court jurisprudence and added a tougher decision on bail for those who target women. That's the fact. Let's talk about the actual combat against crime. Let's talk about crimes against children. Mr. Speaker, you cannot make this up. What the Leader of the Opposition has said, what his Justice critic has reiterated, is that no matter what progress we make with the help of the Bloc Québécois and the NDP on taking down child pornography off the internet, they will reverse it. That is morally bankrupt as a policy and incredulous to assert in this chamber. The combat against crime includes combat against child sex predators.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was just a desperate and untrue response. And after 9 years of these NDP Liberals, Canadians don't even feel safe walking down the street, taking public transit, or even being in their own homes. Canadians want repeat violent offenders to remain behind bars and mandatory jail time for serious violent crimes. Small businesses have had it with the crime and the extra costs. Even every Canadian premier called on the Liberals to scrap the catch-and-release bail policies. So will the Liberals listen and reverse the reckless crime policies, or can they just get out of the way so a Conservative government can fix what they broke?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the facts. The facts, as reported by CTV, are that the Conservative leader has vowed to repeal the legislation entirely should it become law. Yesterday, the Conservative Justice critic indicated that it is exactly that. They would repeal online regulation bills passed by the Liberal government. You know, Mr. Speaker, that might deter some people. It sure as heck is not going to deter me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep Canadians safe. That means Canadian moms, Canadian children, and if I do that with my party's help, with the Bloc Québécois' help, and the NDP's help, so be it. I will do it over the opposition to the Conservatives because their position is bankrupt morally and endangers our kids.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Durham.
After a home invasion in Oakville, the Halton police chief said, "Yet another violent offender already out on similar and violent charges with court conditions on him. Anyone surprised that some of these violent criminals reoffend?" Mr. Speaker, I know someone who might be surprised. The Liberal Minister of Justice. Tragic and appalling. He thinks he knows more than police officers do in our country. So the question is, when will this Liberal government listen to police across Canada and stop violent criminals?
Great question. Great. I invite the Honourable Member for Ottawa Centre, please, not to take the floor when not recognized by the Chair. The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Here's an example of a few police officers that I'm listening to, Mr. Speaker. Deputy Chief in Vaughan, Alvaro Almeida, has said specifically that without investments in resources like courts and Crown attorneys, we can't actually keep the bad guys in jail. The National Police Federation, or police officers that I'm also listening to, what they've said is that it's interesting that in order to be appointed as a JP that decides bail in Nova Scotia, you have to have legal training before getting that appointment. That is not the case throughout the country, certainly not in the case in the province of Ontario that I call home. That's an issue that needs to be addressed because we all have a vested interest in keeping people safe.
Again, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member, who's a new member from Durham, not to take the floor, especially after I asked a question. It's important for us to hear the response. L'Honorable Député de Sudbury.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury. Mr. Speaker, our government is implementing a tax holiday for all Canadians, effective December 14th. This is a move by our government to help Canadians celebrate during the holidays without additional costs. And this will be real savings on children's clothing, food, and many other essential items. But the Conservatives voted against our tax holiday. Could the minister explain how this government will help Canadians financially and give them a bit of relief during the holiday time?
L'honorable ministre.
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and for the Quebec Economic Development Agency. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, what is the Conservative leader doing for people to give them a tax holiday? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There's a movie everyone watches during the holiday season, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Well, that's happening right here, Mr. Speaker. The movie, though, has a happy ending. The Grinch's heart gets bigger, but the Conservative leader's heart is not getting bigger. He just doesn't want to help Quebec and Quebec families buy toys, diapers, or groceries. Mr. Speaker, Canadians can definitely not trust or have confidence in the Conservative Party's leader.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, it's been 8 months since fiscal year end. How are we supposed to vote on billions in spending and taxation without the deficit number? Speculation is that the government has blown through its deficit anchor, its fiscal anchor, despite the finance minister promising that, quote, "This is our fiscal anchor, a line we shall not cross, and that will ensure our finances remain sustainable so long as it remains unbreached." So what's the deficit? How big is the breach, and how unsustainable are federal fiscal finances?
Wow. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have the lowest deficit of all of our G7 peers. We also have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. And it will be our pleasure to present a fall economic statement so that all Canadians can see what the books look like, include the Conservative Party. But Mr. Speaker, we also need to support Canadians. We also need to have affordability measures, and that's why we're cutting taxes for Canadians. We're giving Canadians a tax break, and the Conservatives have no explanation for why they want to deny Canadians a tax holiday.
The honourable member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, here's what Stephen Paulus, the past governor of the Bank of Canada, said just 2 days ago. I would say we're in a recession. Yeah. I wouldn't even call it a technical one.
Wow.
The past governor says we're in a recession. The current deputy governor of the bank says it's an emergency. So when will the government start listening to the experts and understand that its policies on its budgets, its spending, and its deficits, whatever the number is, have caused a recession and an economic emergency?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance.
I have to say, I am quite disappointed in the Conservative member opposite. He should know what the definition of a recession is. We haven't even had a single quarter of negative growth. In fact, Statistics Canada has just revised our growth numbers upwards for the last 3 years. They would like to quote former governors of the Bank of Canada. I've got one. David Dodge just said that because the Conservative Party was obsessively focused on reducing the federal deficit between 2011 and 2015, the Harper government unnecessarily contributed to a slower, rather more muted recovery. Wow. This Liberal government has ensured a very strong recovery, the strongest in the G7.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
After 9 years of broken fiscal promises, this Liberal NDP Prime Minister has zero credibility. He promised that the budget would balance itself. His Finance Minister promised that the 2023 deficit would not exceed $40 billion. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has told us that this Liberal government has shattered through their $40 billion deficit promise by $7 billion. So I have one question for the Prime Minister. What is the deficit?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Speaker, what we hear on the other side of the House is not resonating with Canadians. The reason being because Canadians, in their time of need, require a government that recognizes that their supports for dental care, supports for pharmacare, supports for a national school food program, supports for the most vulnerable in our economy are ones that the Conservatives ignore. They vote against every single time, Mr. Speaker, and on this side of the House, we will always be there to support Canadians in their time of need.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, the government is introducing a 2-month tax break for all Canadians. Starting December 14th, we're taking the GST off children's clothing and diapers, as well as prepared foods and restaurant meals. You would think that after all their preaching about cutting taxes, the Conservatives would walk the walk and support this measure. But they voted against it. Why won't they axe this tax? Can the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure tell us why axing this tax on the middle class is important for all Canadians? Merry Christmas, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
That's right, Mr. Speaker. Despite positioning themselves in a contrary way, these guys are all tax and no axe. They're literally opposing a tax cut on the essentials over the holidays. We're talking about food, about clothes, about diapers, about car seats, about snowsuits for kids. Mr. Speaker, the only thing that they want to cut is the programs that are delivering real support to Canadians. They want to cut the programs that are helping get homes built across this country. They want to cut the programs that are actually delivering meaningful change to the environment in this country. They will not stand up for working families. They've had the chance and they said no.
The honourable member for Timmins James Bay.
Alberta has one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, and yet we have documents showing that Premier Daniel Smith is organizing a secret mission to bring over cheap labor from the United Arab Emirates, of all places. This is at the same time that the UCP state they find it, quote, disgusting that workers from other parts of Canada are working in the oil patch. Now, Liberals and Conservatives have allowed big CEOs to drive down wages and exploit foreign workers while leaving Albertans who need jobs left behind. So to the Minister for Workplace Development, will she stand up to Daniel Smith and defend the jobs of Alberta workers? Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Veterans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government's priority is to offer Canadians good jobs, good, well-paying jobs. We prioritize Canadian workers. We are aware of workers' business needs, and that's why we have made changes to the temporary foreign worker program so that we can meet the needs of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we are always there to support Canadian workers. Thank you.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, affordable housing dollars should go towards building truly affordable homes. Yet that's not the case most of the time. All because CMHC doesn't use any affordability criteria for the majority of units they fund, and even when they do, they rarely use their own definition of affordable housing. It's why I've introduced a motion that follows the calls of housing experts like Dr. Caroline Weitzman to require income-based definitions across all affordable housing programs. Will the minister listen to these experts and take up this important call?
The Honourable Minister for Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have great respect for my honourable colleague, as I do Dr. Weitzman, who I've had the opportunity to benefit from on a number of occasions when it comes to receiving her advice. The majority of our grant programs that deliver cash subsidies to affordable housing projects are designed to support social housing, nonprofit housing, housing for low-income families. We do have a range of other programs, including financing, that delivers market-based housing with certain affordability criteria to make sure we can build more middle-class homes as well. I look forward to continuing to work with that member and other members of this House who want to advance these important conversations and get more homes built, including in places like Kitchener. Thank you.
And so we come to an end